Are you ready? Part 9, negate the resolution, resolve unilateral military action by the United States is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. Our observation is twofold. First, the pro has the burden of proving the presence of a nuclear threat, as well as the justification for being the first to strike against that threat with unilateral military action. If both of these requirements are not met, the round must default in the negative's favor. Contention 1 is exaggerated threat. Subpoint A is deterrence. Unable to prove that Iran and similar countries are not satisfied with only having the materials and infrastructure necessary to assemble a bomb, our opponents are jumping to conclusions. Does such a threat really exist, or is it just an attempted spread of agenda? As Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara explained in 1968, we deterred deliberate nuclear attack upon the United States or its allies by maintaining a highly reliable ability to inflict unacceptable damage upon any single aggressor or combination of aggressors at any time during the course of a strategic nuclear exchange, even after a surprise first strike. Such capabilities would in essence make the enemy's first strike an act of national suicide. Even passing weapons to terrorists wouldn't offer countries an escape from deterrence. Therein stopping attacks before they occur and minimizing the nuclear threat. Subpoint B is preventative war. Having the invasion and occupation of a seemingly WMD-less Iraq revealed an exaggeration of the benefits of preventative war as a means of counter-proliferation, as well as an underestimation of its costs? What are the emerging threats that which allow the United States to throw overboard the fundamental structure of the UN Charter insofar as it relates to the use of force? Never mind that the UN weapons inspectors found no evidence of nuclear weapons activity in Iraq since 1991, and never mind that also the Saddam al-Qaeda link, in which about half of the American people believed, has now been called by the president something for which there is no evidence. The mere fact that these things were believed was enough for a majority of Congress to give the president a green light for the invasion. Without clear evidence to the contrary, the only option is to conclude that preventative war costs more than it's worth and is unjustified in another nation without a legitimate cause. Convention 2 is multilateral. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the problem of nuclear proliferation is global, and any effective response must also be multilateral. Israel and the United States have been closely collaborating on any number of fronts, and Russia sees Iran's programs as a threat to its interests. So not only is a unilateral strike illegal according to Article 15 of the UN Charter, but would be foolish when there are multitude of countries that are willing to fall in line behind us. In fact, U.S. military action, especially if unilateral, could further alienate Muslims and others worldwide, reinforcing the view that the United States resorts too often to military force. The resulting impact is then that America increases anti-American sentiment. That can hold for many years, such as in the case of the events in Iran in 1953, and loses credibility among foreign partners. So even if unilateral military action might be more efficient, that still does not justify it. Affirming the resolution fuels the root cause of terrorism, concretely creating problems while attempting to solve one whose existence is uncertain. Contention 3 is military. The United States could decide to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, but that choice has uncertain prospects for success and a very high likelihood of wider conflict and instability. Neither an American nor an Israeli military option is likely to produce sufficient gain to be worth the potential costs. But paradoxically, without a credible military threat, Iran is much less likely to make the nuclear concessions that meet U.S. requirements. Simply put, the threat of a military option is more effective than the actions themselves. Actually, launching into military action would unnecessarily provoke countries to take further action. Nations around the world will seek nuclear weapons, claiming self-defense, and thereby destroy the NPT regime. Such nations would heed the words of George Fernandez, the Indian defense minister, that before one challenges the United States, one must first acquire nuclear weapons. It would be deeply contrary to the interests of the United States, as well as the interests of the world community, to encourage such a psychology. In the end, a military strike, regardless of how it is performed, could only result in the excessive loss of life and increased foreign hostilities to the United States. This in and of itself shows injustice by putting the lives of the few against the many and instigating conflict. So for all these reasons, we urge a con ballot.
Excuse me. Are opponents ready? Judge. Resolved. Unilateral military force by the United States is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. Observation 1. The round should be weighed on whichever side best gives the United States the tools to uphold the social contract. Under the social contract, the highest value is life. Thus, the pro must prove that stopping nuclear proliferation protects American lives in order to be justified. Observation 2. The judge should view unilateral military force as a tool in the toolbox for fighting proliferation. The pro only has to prove one scenario in which unilateral military force is justified as a tool of international policy to win this round. As the magnitude of a potential nuclear blast is so large, the United States should be justified in doing anything necessary to prevent proliferation. Voting pro does not mean that other anti-proliferation measures should be excluded from consideration. Condition 1. Cyber warfare is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. Subpoint A. Cyber warfare stops proliferation without putting Americans in harm's way. Shia 13. Cyber technology extends the reach of the military, with a Stuxnet attack on our nuclear weapons program serving as a prime example, without putting Americans in harm's way. Not only do the advanced technologies eliminate the problems with having troops die on foreign soil, but they also greatly decrease the cost of weapons. In the cyber realm, the big costs of satellites and the fiber cables have already been paid for. With that infrastructure in place, a few thousand lines of code can now be an effective weapon to inflict array and damage. Subpoint B. Stuxnet delayed Iran's nuclear program by 2-3 years. Hassanal, 2013. Iranian engineers have finally succeeded in neutralizing and purging the computer virus known as Stuxnet from their country's nuclear machinery. Their malicious code made its way as early as 2009 into equipment controlling centrifuges Iran is using to enrich uranium, dealing a significant but perhaps temporary setback to Iran's suspected nuclear weapons to work. Condition 2. It is justified to use unilateral military force against terrorists to prevent nuclear proliferation. There is a greater than 50% chance of a nuclear attack in our lifetime, 30% in the next decade. Matthew Bunn, Harvard Kennedy, 2010. A baby born today with an expected lifetime of 80 years faces a greater than 50-50 chance that a nuclear weapon attack will occur unless the number of weapons and available weapons-grade material is radically reduced. A 10-kiloton bomb detonated in Midtown Manhattan would kill 500,000 people and cause $1 trillion in direct economic damage. It's not just nation-states such as Iran and Burma who are looking to create stores of weapons-grade uranium. Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, as well as despots around the world, are looking to acquire nuclear weapons from enterprising nuclear smugglers. Subpoint B. Terrorists inevitably attain nuclear weapons. Lalor 11. The tradecraft involved suggests that experienced international smugglers and traffickers have teamed up with nuclear insiders to create a more secure distribution chain. Organized crime has entered the market and created an unholy alliance. Nuclear insiders steal. Organized crime finds a buyer and arranges a delivery. This alliance eliminates a critical weakness that the favored police allows terrorists to become consumers of nuclear material. Much like the buyers of illegal drugs, globalization involving technology have made the knowledge and equipment needed to build an atomic bomb available to anyone with a little time and money. The increasing involvement of organized crime in the nuclear market strongly suggests that absent real changes in law enforcement activities in the Black Sea region, terrorists will eventually be able to buy enough fissile material there to build an atomic bomb. Subpoint C. A dirty bomb will kill millions as well as devastate the global economy. Goodspeed, 2012. The greater risk comes from malicious radiological attack, or dirty bomb, that uses common industrial or commercial nuclear material to create panic, threaten the health of thousands over a prolonged period, make entire cities uninhabitable, cause billions of dollars in damage, and destroy the global economy. An area of approximately 1,000 square kilometers extending over 3 states would be contaminated, he said. Over an area of over 300 typical city blocks, there would be a 1 in 10 risk of death from cancer for residents living in the contaminated area for 40 years. Subpoint D. U.S. forces key to protecting against nuclear threat. Train 13. In total, 68 grams of HEU, enough to make 2 nuclear weapons, were removed from the Czech Republic last month, part of a program by the United States President Barack Obama's administration to stop weapons-grade uranium and nuclear material from getting to the hands of terrorist organizations. It is little wonder that such missions are conducted in secrecy. The nuclear material that has been transported can be used by terrorists to develop a crude nuclear weapon. These missions are overseen by the Department of Defense and have the backing of top U.S. military commanders. Thus, we see that only the United States has a military with wall and strength to fight the nuclear terrorist threat. Without using unilateral military force, there is a guarantee of nuclear terrorism. Thank you.
Another first question?
Yes, of course.
All right. I'll start with your subpoint B. How is this unique to the United States? Your second mention.
Okay.
About the nuclear material transfers.
To terrorists?
Okay. So why is this? Why does the United States? Why are they the only ones who can deal with this? Why shouldn't this be a multilateral effort?
It shouldn't. It should be a unilateral effort. That's what we're trying to say.
I'm asking you why it shouldn't. Like, what is the warrant for it?
Because it works more efficiently. We do it unilaterally, and we don't waste any American lives.
So if we're doing this across international boundaries, then we shouldn't get any clearance from these countries first.
Can you repeat the question?
So if we're interfering with other countries' sovereignty, we shouldn't get any clearance first. We should just intervene.
If the country is a threat to the United States, and our aim is to stop global proliferation of nuclear weapons, then yes, we should infringe on those rights because of the fact that we're stopping and we're saving American lives directly. Now, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Okay. So your third point talks about the military, right? Military interference in other countries, right? Okay, so you talk about the cost a lot. You talk a lot about the cost of the intervention. What exactly is the cost of cyber warfare?
Okay, I don't have any statistics on the cost of the cyber warfare. You're saying that it's low. However,
we're saying that there are none, actually.
Well, you're saying that it's low because you said most of the infrastructure is already there.
All of the infrastructure is already there and paid for.
Okay. I answered your question. Dealing with your cyber warfare, what is the likelihood of us being able to repeat something like Stuxnet again?
100%. It's just a program. It's a code. So basically, what we're trying to say is we're not going to infringe upon everyone's rights and nations.
After Stuxnet.
So what we're trying to say is that since it was so effective in Stuxnet in deterring their nuclear capabilities and in deterring for 3 years, then we should be able to use it in other countries.
So if Stuxnet worked for a time in Iran and now isn't working in Iran, then how does this prove that it can be done?
And we're not talking just about Stuxnet, we're talking about cyber warfare in general.
Okay,
so Stuxnet is just one example of it actually working.
What
that
proof
is
do you
our
have that
warrant.
will be able to disable nuclear, more nuclear
What was the
reactors?
first part of your question?
What is the proof that you have that will be able to disable more nuclear
It's
reactors
worked.
other than the fact that it has worked in this one case before?
Okay, we've only used it in one case, and it's
Correct.
100%.
And is it not working in that one case again since they identified the
It's
data leaks
working.
there?
It worked for its purpose.
And yet Iran is still proliferating.
It delayed the program by 3 years.
Right, and
That was the purpose of Stuxnet. It wasn't
Was the
to
purpose
eliminate the
not-
program. It was to delay them. That's
okay,
what it did.
so are you not applying a Band-Aid solution to the problem then?
That's not a Band-Aid solution. What
How
I'm trying to
so?
say is that
If they only stopped it for 3 years,
Let me explain. So what we're trying to say is that in order for us to stop proliferation in general, we're trying to include an alternative, which in this case is cyber warfare. Stuxnet, yes, it was like it delayed them for 3 years, but that means that they're not proliferating right now, right?
No.
To-
No, it doesn't. It means that through, well, I don't know when it exactly started, but it means that, okay, so if it has delayed them for 3 years, that means that they're not done now. That doesn't mean that they're not
like
working
it's
on
still
it now.
delaying
That doesn't
them.
mean that they haven't, that they're not still building weapons right now. That just means that
Can
it is
you-
added time to the timetable.
Yeah, so they want weapons, right?
Yes.
Would you consider a nuclear Iran a threat?
In my opinion, no.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, would you consider a nuclear terrorist organization a threat?
If they have access to these weapons, yes.
So if we're able to tell you, excuse me. Yeah, excuse me. If we're able to prove that a terrorist organization has a chance and the capability of actually obtaining a nuclear weapon, you would agree that that's a threat, right?
I disagree with the fact that they have the ability to. That's
Thank
not.
you. Second speaker.
Alright, so, Tom's ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Alright, Judge. I'm gonna start by just my friend's case, and Tom, please can we go back on our own. I'd like to start with their first contention. They talk about the types of warfare there are. They talk about Stuxnet. The thing is that they can only prove in one instance that it did work, and they can't prove it's working now and presently. Eventually, we have to admit that Iran and these countries will find a way around this 2 to 3 delay, because eventually if they keep doing the same method, we can't guarantee it's actually going to work in the long run. Thereby, we're still going to lose lives because it isn't going to work forever. It's a Band-Aid solution, and it's not going to hold ground against the test of time. So this isn't really proving anything with their point. They're saving more lives or proving any type of justification through it. Second, talk about cybercrime again, but we're repeating effort, and we guarantee that they can't prove that it will actually work or make a difference. And unless they can actually provide the evidence that shows it will work and it will not, or that they will not find a way around it later in time, then it isn't a relevant solution and shouldn't be looked to. Their second contention, they talk about how unilateral method is best, but in the first half of that contention, at least, they don't actually talk about why unilateral is best. They just talk about types of how nuclear attacks are bad in general, which we can't look to. But the fact is that they don't have any warrant for the terrorist groups. And again, we talk about how terrorists get weapons. But again, passing weapons to terrorists would not offer countries an escape from deterrence. So that's still there for the countries. And overall, they can't prove that these, they say that terrorists could steal weapons, but actually clarify how, or if it's happened, or if it's had any intention of actually using them in any way against the U.S. Unless they can actually prove that these things are happening and that terrorists can actually have the means to actually do this, we can't assume that this is going to happen, that this justifies something, a military strike. Again, then they talk about dirty bombs in general, and they talk about how nuclear weapons and dirty bombs are fundamentally different things. Finally, Iran has had for decades had plenty of dirty bomb material to use for such an attack, and it hasn't happened yet. So we cannot look to this as a nuclear attack as well. That's completely irrelevant. And then they talk about death in general. But the thing is that from a military strike, to sense their methods will not work. And if we had a strike, tens if not thousands of innocent Iranians would likely die within the first year of a strike. And millions would die within a decade or two from some form of radiation-induced cancer or the like. So we're still killing millions of people for no reason at all, and it isn't justified, especially when the military costs money in some way or another, because nothing is free. It will cost lives, it will cost an increase in anti-American sentiment as a whole, and it will... And because of the fact that acting unilaterally is against international law according to UN Charter, we can't say that's justified either, because essentially the U.S. will lose credibility as a nation by ignoring this international law as well. And also, we will end up insinuating war, because when you strike war on there, they're only provoking other countries from attacking you as well. Then back on our case, we talk about it's an exaggerated threat. It's true. As we've often seen, that the capabilities would deterrence has made a huge impact in stopping countries from doing such thing. And preventative war hasn't had, preventative war isn't guaranteed to actually work, because the fact is that if you don't know these weapons are there, if you don't know that something's going to happen, you can't actually prove that it's going to go through. And also we talk about how multilateralism is the best way, because the Council of Foreign Relations actually proposes that if nuclear proliferation has to be global, we have to have it on a multilateral scale. And if we talk the military would likely increase instability in these nations overall, and how if before one challenges the United States, we must first acquire a nuclear weapon, and how this makes sense, and how it's the logical progression overall. And that's why we strongly urge a combat. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll just run prep.
Okay.
$15 seconds used. Okay, are my opponents ready?
Yes.
Is the judge ready? Starting off with my opponent's observation 1, that the pro has to prove a threat. We will prove a threat right now. We have 3 ways. First, Dan Farber in 2013 reciting case gives you a 50% chance of a nuclear strike on the United States within our lifetimes, 30% chance within the next decade. This is a real and a clear and present danger to the United States. Second, Graham Allison of Harvard's Belfer Center in 2013 says that Iran is trying to get a nuke, and within 3 months, if they are motivated, could have a nuclear device. Also, since Iran is on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, they are a clear threat to the United States, along with their rhetoric of destroying Israel and destroying the United States, and clearly right now with tensions over Syria, Iran is a threat. Third, according to the Army War College in 2011, North Korea is creating crude nuclear weapons that have an EMP effect, which would cripple U.S. infrastructure. And not only are they creating these weapons, but they're also, according to the National Research Council in 2012, they're selling this technology to Iran, other rogue nations, and terrorist groups. The threat is real, thus we meet through observation 1. Moving on to their contention level. Their first argument talks about how there's an exaggerated threat. However, I've just proved to you that the threat is not exaggerated. In fact, it's my opponents doing poor analysis. First, we agree that in hindsight, some of the actions in Iraq were misguided. However, thus right now it's fortunate that the Department of Defense in 2011 named cyber warfare as the new frontier for warfare, and that the United States is the most prepared out of any nation in the world in order to fight on this new front. Cyber warfare kills 0 people and has the best return on investment. We delayed Iran's nuclear program by 2 to 3 years, and the resolution talks about, quote, preventing nuclear proliferation. As a result of this, we are being topical with cyber warfare, and that's a clear reason why it's not an exaggerated threat that we can still stop. Moving on to the second rebuttal, that targeting terrorists only is still a good thing. Remember that from Lawyer 2011, from the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences, that terrorists are currently buying nuclear material off the black market over near the Black Sea. Now, this means that there is a clear threat and that they've already bought enough nuclear material for 2 dirty bombs. So at the point where terrorist groups are buying nuclear material, and at the point where we cannot stop them because we're not using military force, then we need to use force to stop terrorist groups. You cannot reason with a terrorist group. You cannot use diplomacy with Al-Qaeda. Fourth, we are not advocating for preventative war. We are not advocating invasions of other nations. Rather, we're advocating for two things. One, use of cyber warfare, and two, targeting terrorist groups. Also, Iraq is a terrible example for them, because while the purpose was to stop WMDs, politics made us stay in for 10 years because of nation building. So most of Iraq is irrelevant to the topic of stopping proliferation, and rather like it's a reason why nations building is bad. So on the topic of stopping proliferation, we actually see that stopping proliferation is the only thing that can save lives. When you weigh this round, basically see which side can actually save lives. In the world of the pro, we're at least trying to give the United States as many tools as possible to stop proliferation. My opponents, on the other hand, are actually taking tools away from the United States. Moving on to their next argument, about multilateralism. First, multilateralism is a terrible system to use. Look at the United Nations right now. It's gridlocked over Syria. Russia and China veto the U.S. over everything. We can barely get anything out of the Security Council. Second, the United Nations actually gives countries the right to use any force necessary in order to stop proliferation. This is Resolution 1540, which actually supersedes the Charter. So these are reasons why multilateralism is still a reason to vote for the affirmative due to a preemptiveness of unilateralism. Moving on to their third argument about the military. I've already answered why a nuclear Iran would be a terrible idea. One, they're a state sponsor of terrorism. Two, the regime is unstable, and they're also a rogue nation who might sell this technology to other countries or rogue nations. So moving on to the rebuttals that my opponent made on our case. They said that first they just dropped all of our framework. So you need to weigh this round based on basically using nuclear proliferation, using unilateral force as a tool in the toolbox. We don't use it every time. We use it when it's necessary, and also be voting on the social contract and voting on life. Now moving on to the contention level, she says that we can't prove that cyber warfare will continue to work. However, we do that empirically. The only times we've ever used cyber warfare, it's been successful. And also, we have the best success rate out of any in cyber warfare. Thank you. Okay, ready for crossfire?
Yeah. You can have the first question.
Okay, sure. So when we're talking about countries like Iran and North Korea, are these countries rational? Can they be deterred through nuclear deterrence?
I'm sorry, what countries did you say?
Iran and North Korea?
Well,
Basically just rogue
yes.
nations in general?
Yes, I think it contributed.
Why would they be deterred if they're not using rational calculus?
Well, the fact is that despite everything, they have so to preserve themselves as a nation. How are you a nation if you decide to wipe out everyone in general?
Okay, can you deter terrorist groups?
I'm sorry?
Can you deter terrorist groups?
It depends on their value of life, but the fact is that can you prove they will actually use these weapons?
I mean, terrorists use suicide bombers, so their value of life is not very high.
So basically they don't value their life. How can you actually prove they'll use these against us? You still don't have any.
We actually do. We tell you that there's a 50% chance in our lifetime of a terrorist of a terrorist or a rogue state using a nuclear weapon against the United States. We also tell you that 2 dirty bombs worth of nuclear material have already been purchased.
We already talked about how dirty bombs aren't really linked to nuclear war in general because it's a different concept. But
right. I'm sorry. They're not linked to nuclear war. However, they are linked to nuclear proliferation because the proliferation of nuclear material is basically used to make a dirty bomb.
Alright, we still haven't used proof that they're actually going to use them. Just because you say there's a 50% chance to actually.
Why wouldn't a terrorist use the best weapon of all time, the nuclear weapon?
How are they going to get it here? How are they going to make it work? I mean, there's all kinds of.
We're already telling you how they're getting the weapons. They're buying them off. They're buying fissile material from the black market. That's the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences. And we're telling you that the consensus of experts is that within our lifetimes there's a 50% chance of an attack. So are those stats not good enough?
Question?
Yeah, do I have another question?
Yes.
Sure. Let's talk about North Korea.
Okay.
If North Korea is a rogue state that's basically failing, they're putting all of their money into their nuclear program, are they not a threat we should be worried about?
Well, how do you know they actually have any? I'm sorry, can you reiterate what you're trying to.
Okay, North Korea, they're
Yes.
creating a new class of weapons that creates a giant EMP effect which will wipe out our failing infrastructure.
Okay,
Is
yes,
that not a threat?
Can you again prove that they're actually going to use this? Can you actually prove this is actually a threat to us? Can you actually prove, have they made any threat? Have they said anything? You're assuming.
Yeah, like
you're in the nation
North
with
Korea
people
almost
around us.
every
Tell
other
me
week
proof
makes
they're going to.
statements about how it's going to attack the U.S. or fight off the the U.S. aggressor, the West. Basically, like if you want a gold mine of anti-American quotes, you can look straight to North Korea. And actually, our evidence from Larry Bell tells you that North Korea is selling this technology to terrorist groups and Iran. So it's not like they're sitting with their technology and doing nothing. They're actually
how does
using
that
it.
justify your cyber warfare then? How is it actually going to work? How is it actually going to save lives and things like that?
Right. So if we can stop states from ever getting the nuclear weapon in the first place, which is what cyber warfare does, then we're stopping a giant threat.
Unilaterally if there's power in numbers.
Like, are you saying we should use all countries in a concerted cyber warfare effort?
No, just more in general.
Well, if the
Why
answer
does
is
it have to be
no,
unilateral?
because we have the best cyber warfare capabilities of any other country in the world.
Okay, so just because it's best you can't have another nation.
Like, why would you use, like, France
I
for your
still
cyber
think it's
warfare
justification as to why it
capabilities?
has to be one. All right. Okay. Do you have another question?
Yeah, we're out of time.
Oh, sorry. All right.
Alright, I'm gonna see some pro. Cease prep, please. Let me go down pro. Alright, so first, the first convention deals with cyber warfare and the methods, or well, sorry, the merits of that. Basically, they're saying that because we were able to empirically stop Iran from being able to proliferate for a period of 2 to 3 years, that is sufficient reason enough to believe that this is going to work in the future. First off, they're not giving you any actual evidence of this being able to work in other cases, and even in the case of Iran itself, Iran is still proliferating despite these setbacks. They're still working to do this, even though Stuxnet was something that we infected them with. And in addition, I actually would ask you to turn this argument to the con side, because the Stuxnet effort was not a unilateral effort in and of itself. It was an effort. It was a joint effort between the United States and Israel. This evidence from the New York Times. The Diamonic complex in the Negev desert is famous as a heavily guarded heart of Israel's never-acknowledged nuclear arms program. Diamona tested the effectiveness of the Stuxnet computer worm, a destructive program that appears to have wiped out roughly a fifth of Iran's nuclear centrifuges and helped delay, though not destroy, Tehran's ability to make its first nuclear arms. So what this is saying is that basically their effort for the future of U.S. military intervention is something that is actually best accomplished when done with our allies in Israel. So that's something that shows you that it's clearly better to look towards a multilateral effort, and so that's a clear reason why you should be negating the resolution, right there. Their effort isn't unilateral anymore, even if it still is military through this cyber warfare. But in addition, their evidence about terror and the possibility of nuclear attack being 50%, and then they give a 30% number, those, sure, they give you the opinion of someone who has done research in the field. They don't give you the reason why that person made that opinion. They don't give you the warrant behind their argument. So with this, I mean, someone could just throw out statistics of saying there's this likelihood of this happening, and we have no way of evaluating that in this ground, and that's why you shouldn't look to the statistic. But in addition, their cyber warfare, as far as that being the method of being able to stamp out this terrorism, that's not applying to their terror, so the terror will still happen even if they continue with their plan.
All right, opponents ready?
Yeah.
Judge? All right, so Judge, I'm going to start with the framework, and then I'm going to move on to a couple of partner arguments. All right. Opponents ready? Judge? Okay, starting on the framework, my opponent's only framework was talking about how we have to prove the threat. We proved that with our rebuttal 1, 2, and 3, talking about how there is a real threat and the threat is real. We talked about a nuclear North Korea and a nuclear Iran. We talked about how these are real threats and these exist. We also talked about how if a terrorist organization was to obtain a nuclear weapon and how they are on the way of getting a nuclear weapon on my opponent's side, then that is the real threat that we prove. That is the threat. We do fall under their own circumstances. Now, moving on to our framework, my opponent's already dropped our framework, so you have to judge us based on a social contract standard. You have to see what saves the most lives, what side saves the most American lives in this round. Second, you also have to say that we only, as a pro, we only have to prove one scenario in which the threat is real, in which we can use unilateralism in order to solve the problem. Okay, so moving on to the world of the pro and the world of the con. In the world of the pro, we have a world without nuclear weapons. We have a world with deterred nuclear proliferation. When that happens, that means that we're upholding our observation with less American lives being taken, because if there are no nuclear weapons, there are no nuclear threats. That means that American lives are being saved right there. In the world of the con, however, we not only have accidental attacks by countries like North Korea and Iran, who are unstable and rogue nations, but also we have terrorist organizations that acquire nuclear weapons. That is your biggest impact of the round right there. This is the lives that we're going to save just by having no nuclear material by rogue nations. Moving on to cyber terrorism, my opponents just tried to turn our argument, talking about how it wasn't a unilateral threat, unilateral attempt. However, the fact of the matter is that even if we did use some of the Israeli technology. It's like us saying that we use a French weapon to kill us, like in the field, the military. That doesn't mean like we can use French-made weapon. That doesn't mean that it wasn't a unilateral threat by the United States. Like it was thought out in the United States. It was planned in the United States to use United States resources. That is why it's a unilateral threat. So my opponents intend to turn totally backfired on them. Also, extend our Richardson 13 evidence talking about how basically cyber terrorism and cyber warfare is a new frontier. That is what we should be using as a unilateral nation. Now, remember our turn. Extend our turn on their multilateralism work because of the fact of the matter that right now the UN is gridlocked, and also the UN Resolution 1540 talking about how we must use any preventive measure necessary in order to prevent nuclear proliferation. Thank you.
Would you mind for the first question?
Absolutely.
All right. So where are you giving an example where unilateralism is preferred over multilateralism?
Cyber warfare.
Cyber warfare.
Yep.
Okay. So if we use Israel's technology to work through this, why is your last response
We did not use
sufficient?
Israel's technology. They advised us and gave us some coders. However, the main thrust of the effort was the United States. That's why it's a unilateral action.
So if we had cooperation with Israel through this, and we had their
Here's how you determine if something's unilateral. Let me I know exactly where you're going with this. Just let me interject. Here's how you know if something's unilateral. You take one country and say, would the action still have occurred if the other nation wasn't there? Well, Israel would not have launched a cyber attack because it needed the United States. The United States did not need Israel.
What proof do you have? What proof do you have?
Like
that
this is all the evidence from Tom Shea in the New York Times, same source as you.
That Israel needed the United States.
What?
Read to me that Israel needed the United States to do this.
I mean, it's like a synthesis of the card. So it talks about how the United States engineers engineered malicious code, and now that code is the United States', and that Israel, like it says that Israel helped, but the main thrust of the effort was from the United States.
Okay. I'm wondering about your terrorism. Where are you? If cyber warfare is our main effective means of military intervention, then how are we going to deal with the transfer of fissile material?
Right, so we give you two ways in which you can combat proliferation. One is if, like, you're going to attack a country, use cyber warfare. If you're going to attack a terrorist group who's trying to acquire a nuclear weapon, then you should use military force,
Okay.
like a drone strike or something.
And so does this military force not, as we stated in our third contention, does that military force not increase the incentive to proliferate for other countries?
Like, at the point where we're destroying military weapons or we're destroying contacts, then that doesn't make any sense that countries would proliferate more and thus incite the wrath of the United States.
It simply does. The reason why it does is because these countries,
Okay,
the reason why these
let's just
countries
make
are
a-
proliferating.
Okay, so let's bring up a hypothetical scenario. Let's say Iran gets bombed tomorrow.
Okay.
Why would they then rebuild their bombed out nuclear facilities and proliferate more?
Because if
Great
someone tells you
question,
you can't do
actually.
something, why would
We
you?
electronically bomb them with Stuxnet, and yet they're still trying to proliferate. This is exactly what you're
I
asking.
mean, like, the whole purpose of Stuxnet was to prevent the proliferation.
Correct.
It wasn't to
Just
stop
like
it.
the bombing is to prevent them from proliferating. They can just rebuild the infrastructure, just like they can just rewire and recode their infrastructure.
There's a main difference between them, like between a cyber warfare attack and actually like their actual resources on the ground being destroyed. That is
Okay.
why
What proof do you
psychologically
have that
Iran
we
does
can
not
destroy these
necessarily.
underground facilities
Here,
through all
I'll
of
tell
the
you.
layers of
In
the-
1983, Iraq was building weapons of mass destruction in facilities. The United States
And
used
Israel.
missiles and destroyed the
And Israel.
facilities, and Iraq never got nuclear weapons.
And Israel. You're giving me another example where
I mean, like, the United
multilateralism
States and
works
Israel
better.
are basically the same countries geopolitically. Like, their military actions are so concerted that it's like they're not really separate, distinct,
Yes, they are.
like operations.
So therefore, at that extent, we're showing you that multilateralism is not in any way inferior to unilateralism. And so at that point,
If
then
they're
we
equally
can
good,
gain
you can still
increased,
vote pro.
Credibility, then we don't lose that credibility throughout the world. So that's a place where we're doing the exact same thing that you're doing, and we're minimizing the impacts of it.
So, like, even if multilateralism is good, that doesn't mean unilateralism still isn't also good. Remember the
Right,
whole
we're just
tool in the
showing you
toolbox
that-
argument. That
However, you're missing the part that multilateralism is better because it decreases our loss of credibility.
okay,
we're
if
not doing
both
something
things
by
are good
ourselves.
and one's simply a little bit better, that doesn't mean that
Which is
they're
why
both not
one
good.
is not justified over the other. Because if one thing is better to do than the other thing to do, then you should do the thing that's better. That's why it's not justified.
Multi-prop. Everyone's ready?
Yes.
Judge? Alright. I guess we're just gonna go down, this is going on the round. Alright, the first reason I believe we should vote a come out is because of this cyber warfare they talked about wasn't even a unilateral effort. They say, well, if we talked about their example of France, the fact is that it was a multilateral effort because you're using things in France. No matter which way you put it, they are different countries, different entities. It was a multilateral effort, and the point is that they don't have a single example of a time when unilateral effort was better. So how can we say it's justified that we should do it if they can't prove it actually works? And again, there's no more for what they're saying about their terrorist action. There's no proof this is actually going to happen. In our contention, we talk about how before one challenges the United States, one must first acquire weapons, said by George Hernandez, the Indian defense minister. The fact is that you have to be able to get these weapons and have to actually prove that they're going to use them in a way and prove that it's actually going to happen. The fact is that they don't save lives under their qualifications as declared, so they don't meet their own observation in that point. Therefore, they can't win the round if they can't meet that own observation. The fact is that there's, they said nothing about the fact that they're still causing wider conflict and instability in these nations. No matter what you do, from what they're saying, you're still going to cause instability. You're still going to cause loss of money, increased anti-American sentiment. You're still going to cause loss of U.S. Credibility as a world power because you're still going to be breaking international law if you act unilaterally in this way. Because the fact is that the Charter calls for an attack to happen before this is actually justified. It's not. As well as the fact that they still haven't proved that unilateral is better than multilateral anyway. So, and they still insinuate war by all these actions they're taking. So since this in itself is not justice, this in itself cannot prove what's just. And if anyone is, and if they can't meet that own observation of proving that it's just in their own self, they don't meet our observation, they don't meet their own observation, and we can't vote pro in this round for those reasons. And the overall factor is then that all these things are still in play, and that overall, on our case, in general, what we still have standing is the fact is that the threat is exaggerated, that deterrence still works for countries. And for all these reasons, we strongly urge a pro ballot. Thank you.
Okay, are my opponents ready? Is the judge ready? So first, I'm really going to clearly explain the difference between unilateralism and multilateralism. It's all about who's leading the operation. A unilateral effort is led by one country with the majority of the resources. A multilateral effort is something done with a majority, with more than one country, for example, going through the United Nations with spread leadership. So if the United States is the number one in charge of a certain operation, it's unilateral. So when we apply this definition of unilateral and multilateral to the actual arguments presented, we see that not only is cyber warfare unilateral because it's directed by the United States, it uses the majority of U.S. resources, but also fighting terrorism should be viewed as a unilateral action as well. So now to explain these arguments more in detail, we have to see that at the point where the United States has the strongest and the best cyber warfare capabilities in the world, we should be able to use these capabilities to fight off rogue nations like Iran and North Korea when they're trying to achieve the nuclear status. Remember, a world in which North Korea, Iran, Sudan, or any third world country who is not stable can attain a nuclear weapon, that world is going to be less safe than a world in which these countries do not have nuclear weapons. So we need to be justified to protect our own citizens and the citizens of the world. We should be able to use anything necessary to stop these. Remember, our framework says that we should view unilateral military force as a tool in the toolbox. You don't use it every time, but you use it when it's necessary. And there are some situations, like fighting terrorists, where diplomacy won't work, going through the UN won't work, using economic sanctions won't work. You have to use military force, things like drone strikes or surgical strikes, basically like things that took out bin Laden, things that are crippling Al-Qaeda now. So we see there are clear reasons to vote for a world in which we use our force, our military force, to stop proliferation. For the world can never be safe when proliferation is occurring. The world will never be safe. If Iran can give nuclear weapons to Al-Qaeda, if Al-Qaeda can potentially use a dirty bomb against the United States, all of these things which have a very real possibility of occurring, the world will only be safe in a world of the affirmative. Thank you.
Wish you the best of you.
Thank you so much.
Good video.
Thank you.
See you around time.
I love
See you.
Who is it? Who is it? Spencer just said he's negative. Is this yours? I'm doing fine.